Hello class, welcome to your next set of notes. Today we're going to be talking about fractions, decimals, and percents. So you should have grabbed two papers, one white, one pink. We're going to cut these out and we're going to glue them. So you just need to cut. I want you to keep the phrase fractions, decimal, and percent patterns. That'll be kind of like your title. But otherwise you can just cut around the whole thing. This one might be a little hard if it doesn't fit your notebook. So if you want to glue it at the end so you can write on it, you're more than welcome to. I'll do that just so I can show you kind of what I mean. But I'm just trimming up around the outside edges. That way it is fully trimmed up. Okay, so I'm not going to glue mine yet just because it's going to take up literally the entire page of my paper. So I'm going to wait till the very end to glue. So I'm just going to do it right here. So here's what we're talking about today: how to convert between a fraction, a decimal, and a percent. Okay, so we're going to go kind of from easiest to hardest. So there are two easy ones. The first one is decimal to percent. The second one is percent to decimal. So these two right here are two easiest ones to work with. Decimal, percent, percent to decimal. It tells you right here exactly what you're going to do. Decimal, you multiply by 100 in order to get your percent. I say instead of multiplying by 100, the exact same thing as multiplying by 100 is moving the decimal two places to the right. So you can multiply by 100, or you can move your decimal two places to the right. So here's what I mean by that. I have my decimal point right here, and I want to move it two places to the right, so I go 1, 2. So now I have 48, and because we are moving it to a percent, I need to add my percent sign. So 0.48 is 48%. Same thing with my 0.08. I take that decimal and I go 1, 2. I have 8 because I don't need that 0 in front, and a percent sign. Last one, same thing. Take your decimal point, move it two places to the right. I now have 256%. I want to point out that it is okay to have a decimal in a percent. There is nothing wrong with that. It is okay to have 0.8%, 0.1%. It's okay to have extremely large numbers like 256. So there is no right or wrong. It can be any of the above. So if decimal to percent, we move our decimal place two places to the right. Percent to decimal is the opposite. Instead of multiplying by 100, you divide by 100, which means that you will be moving the decimal two places to the left. Essentially, you are reversing what we just did. You are moving that decimal back into the equation. So when we look at this problem, I have 97%. I do not see a decimal. So we have to remember the rule that if we do not see a decimal, the decimal point is always at the end. So it is always behind that 7 if you do not see it. If you see a decimal, use the decimal. If you don't see a decimal, you have to place the decimal point at the end. So I'm going to move the decimal place that I added two places to the left. So I go 1, 2, which means I have 0.97. And I want you to get in the habit of putting that 0 in front. so 0.97. The next one, I see 9%. Once again, my decimal is at the end. I do not see it. I move it 2 places to the left. So I go 1, 2. Hopefully we all know and remember that anytime I have an empty space, I need to add a 0 into it. Always, always, always. So my answer would be 0.09. Always add a 0 in any spot that is blank. Last one, I have 125%. So I'm going to move the decimal, which is at the very end again because I do not have a decimal. And I'm going to move it 2 spaces, 1, 2. So now my answer is 1.25. No longer have a 0 in front because I have a 1 in front, and that is okay. You always move it 2. You never move it more than 2 decimal places, ever, ever, ever. So those are the 2 easiest because all you're doing is moving a decimal. There's no like math involved or anything like that. The next easiest is going to be your, or not necessarily most easiest, but the next one that I'm going to have us do is we're going to go from fraction to decimal. And I wouldn't really say it's easy, but it's not terrible. Okay, so it tells us right here what we need to do. We need to just do numerator divided by denominator to get a decimal. Top divided by bottom. Okay, so I'm going to take 7 and I want to divide it by 8. So 7 goes in the house, 8 goes on the outside. 8 cannot go into 7, so I put a 0 and a decimal up top. Then I will add a 0 next to the 7, so now I'm asking myself, 8 goes into 70 8 times. Because 8 times 8 is 64. 70 minus 64 is 6. Add a 0. 8 goes into 60 7 times. That's 56. 60 minus 56 is 4. Add a 0. 8 goes into 40 5 times because 8 times 5 is 40. So my answer as a decimal is 0.875. So fraction to decimal, top divided by bottom, numerator divided by denominator, top dog always goes in the house. The beauty about this is the more you memorize, the easier it gets. Because I have this one memorized. So I technically don't have to do this anymore because I have it memorized. I know what it is. So the more you memorize, the less division work you have to do because it's memorized. You don't have to do it. So 4/5. You could do 4 divided by 5, or, as I'm going to tell you, that is one that I will make you memorize. You do have to have 4/5 memorized. So I will tell you right now that 4/5 is 0.8 as a decimal. Once you do 4 divided by 5, you will get 0.8, and as I said, that does need to be memorized. So either divide it out or have it memorized. Those are your 2 options to go to a decimal. So then based with fraction to decimal, we are then going to flip it, and we're going to do fraction to percent. Because it is very similar to fraction to decimal, your first step is the same. You have to do numerator divided by denominator, and then you have to multiply it by 100, which means that we have to do 3 divided by 4, but once again, if you have it memorized, you do not need to solve it out. So I have that memorized. You will have to have this one memorized. So 3/4 is 0.75 as a decimal. That does need to be memorized. And then you need to move, when we multiply by 100, let's remember, multiply by 100, I need to move the decimal 2 places to the right. So once I get my fraction to my decimal, I will move it 2 places to the right, so that is 75%. That will have to be memorized, and some of you might already have that memorized, which is a great start. So 2/5, we're going to divide this one out just because it's our notebook. So 2 goes in the house, 5 goes on the outside. 5 cannot go into 2, so I put a 0 and a decimal up top. I add a 0 next to my 2. 5 goes into 20 4 times, because 5 times 4 is 20. So my decimal is 0.4. Once again, I will expect that one to be memorized. And then we need to move our decimal 2 places to the right. 1, 2. We always add zeros in our blank spots, so I put a 0 in the blank spot, which will give me 40. So 2/5 is a 40%. If you were to get a 2 out of 5 on a test, you get a 40%. If you were to get a 3 out of 4 on a test, you get a 75%. That is how that works. This is how I do your math stuff every single day. I use this all the time. Okay, the last two are percent to fraction and decimal to fraction, and they're kind of separate. The way that this works is when we go from percent to fraction, the rule is always over 100. Always. No matter what, when you do these problems, you always put it over 100, no matter what the number is. So for instance, 9%, I put it over 100. That's 9 over 100. 9 100ths. If you get a 9%, you got a 9 out of 100. If you get a 97%, you essentially got a 97 out of a 100. If you get 125%, you got 125 over 100. I do not care what the percentage is, it always goes over 100. Always, no matter what. And then unfortunately, because they're fractions, we have to always simplify. Always, always, always. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You have to simplify, whether it says it or not. Simplify. So here's the beauty. 9 100ths cannot be simplified. 97 100ths cannot be simplified. 125 over 100, that can be simplified. So I can divide that by 25. I could divide it by 5 too, 5 twice, but the simplest form will give me 5/4, which is their simplified fraction, or 1 1/4. Both of those would be our fractions in simplest form. One is written as a mixed number, one is written as an improper fraction. You do need both, or you need to know how to do both, I should say. The last one is decimal to fraction. And the way that I tell kiddos to do this one is I say, read it, write it. If you can read it, you can write it. And then obviously we have to simplify. So if you can read a decimal, you can write a fraction. So for instance, right here, this is 6/100ths. So because it is 6/100ths, I write 6 in my numerator, and that is over 100 because it is 6/100ths. Then the next one, I have 48. It's in my 100th spot, because that's my 100th spot. That's my 100th spot. So 48/100ths would be 48 over 100. This 5 here is in the thousandth spot. So that means I would say 125 thousandths. And I would go from there. Then you just have to make sure you simplify them all. So if I'm simplifying 6/100ths, I'm dividing by 2. That gives me 3/50ths. If I'm simplifying 48 over 100, I am dividing by 4. And that gives me 12/25ths. If I'm doing 125 1,000ths, I'm dividing by 25. That gives me 25 over 200. Then I notice I still need to divide that out more. Oops, not 25, sorry, hold on. Oopsies. So if I'm going to divide that by 25, I'm going to get 5 over 40. And then I notice I can divide that again by 5, and I will get 1/8. So those are all of my rules very, very quickly. We will be doing a ton of practice. Obviously, we're doing this for 4 days in class. So there will be so much practice. So by the end of those 4 days, you should have every single one of these rules written down. Okay, every single one needs to be practiced. There's also other things that can make this a little complicated, that can confuse things that you might have questions on. And that is totally fine. And we'll go through a few more questions to make sure you're fully understanding it. So what I would like you to do is, if you haven't done so already, is we need to glue this down now. Mine takes up the entire piece of paper of my notebook. And then for homework, you guys need to finish all the ones around the side. There are 10 problems. If it says D to P, decimal to percent. P to F, percent to fraction. F to D, fraction to decimal. P to D, percent to decimal. F to P, fraction to percent. Show your work right here. Give me the answer right here. So make sure you fill that out so we can go over it in class tomorrow. And then the next page I need to glue down is this pink page. These are all of the ones that you must have memorized. Must have memorized. And there are a lot of them that you should already have memorized. So a lot of this shouldn't be new to you. You guys are very smart that you should be able to understand most of these. So 1/2, that is 0.5 or 50%. The fourths, 0.25, 50%. 2/4, 0.5. Oops, I said 50%. Sorry, that's 25%. 0.25 and 25%. 0.5, 50%. 0.4 or 3/4 is 0.75 or 75%. Okay. Going 1/3 is 0.3 repeating. 2/3 is 0.6 repeating. Here's how I want you guys to memorize how to write them as percentages. It's 33.3%. It is 66.7% because we have to round. 1/5 is 0.2 or 20%. 1/8 is 0.125 or 12.5 or 12.5%. 10, 1/10 is 10.1, 0.1 or 10%. 2/10 is 0.2 or 20%. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to finish filling the rest of this page out. I want you guys to do the ninths as well. You guys can use a calculator to find the decimal and the percentage. I don't need to see the work on it because, like I said, I am going to ask you to memorize it, and there is a pattern to this. There is a pattern to your eighths. So if you can memorize that pattern, that'll totally help you out, and we'll talk about that in class tomorrow, is your patterns that we're talking about here. So finish filling this page out for homework as well. And then, just so you are aware, you will be taking a quiz over this. So you will need to memorize this page, because you will have a 2-minute timed test, timed quiz over this page. I will tell you when it will be. It'll not be a surprise, but I can tell you it will be before the end of the quarter. So you need to make sure that you are studying this page. I do expect it to be memorized. It is 2 minutes. You will not be allowed to do any dividing, things like that. It has to be off the top of your head. 1/2, 0.5, 50% must be memorized. We will then also discuss some tips and tricks to make some things easier, because there are certain problems that'll make your life a lot easier if you can memorize those tips and tricks. But we're not going to do these in the notebook. We'll do those tips and tricks together in our small group rotation. So finish these up for notes. We will talk about them in class on Wednesday. Have a great rest of your day, guys. Bye-bye.